The chamber of the United Nations Security Council was heavy with tension. The session, convened to address the unending crisis in Gaza, quickly turned into a stage for competing visions of peace, sovereignty, and global responsibility. What unfolded was not just a series of speeches, but a vivid reflection of the fractured international order. France took the floor first. The French representative, his tone measured yet resolute, framed the stakes in stark terms. Mr. President, the alternative is simple. Either we preserve the possibility of two states and with it peace, or we allow a permanent conflict to take hold with disastrous consequences for the region and beyond. His words cut sharply through the chamber, reminding everyone that the debate was not only about Gaza's present suffering, but about the very future of the Middle East. The envoy pressed further, urging the Council to act with urgency. France calls on this Council to act with the determination and sense of responsibility that is incumbent upon it. History will judge our ability to seize this moment. Thank you. With those words, France laid down the gauntlet, either seize peace or bear responsibility for its collapse. Next, it was the United States' turn. The American representative's statement was anything but conciliatory. The speech began with an unmistakable criticism of the Council itself. I find it deeply regrettable that Council members have opted to convene this high-level UN Security Council briefing on Gaza on Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, knowing full well that that decision excludes Israel. The accusation was clear. The Council was prioritizing symbolism over substance. The US representative warned that too many meetings had emboldened Hamas rather than advanced peace. He declared, "There have been over 80 Council meetings on this issue since October 7th. The main outcome of these meetings, unfortunately, has been to embolden Hamas, to undermine and disrupt negotiations aimed at freeing all of the hostages and ending the war." The tone was firm, uncompromising. In the last 2 weeks, the US noted Israel had suffered terrorist attacks in Jerusalem and at the Allen border crossing. We condemn these attacks. We offer condolences to the families of those killed. We call upon other countries to join us in a clear and explicit condemnation of this violence by Hamas and its ideological allies. Washington framed Hamas not only as Israel's enemy, but as Gaza's tormentor. The representative pointed out that Hamas had even attacked the very border crossing through which humanitarian aid flowed. Hamas struck the border crossing through which nearly half of all aid delivered to Gaza between May and September of this year has passed. For the US, this was proof that Hamas acted with utter disregard for the people it claimed to defend. The speech built to a defining line, quoting Secretary of State Rubio, "As long as Hamas exists, there will be no peace in the Middle East." The message was blunt. Hamas must go, or the cycle of war would never end. The United States demanded the release of all remaining hostages, condemned Hamas's tactics, and warned against rewarding its obstruction. The American envoy warned colleagues against unilateral recognition of Palestinian statehood at this moment. Unilateral recognition statements do not alter the reality on the ground. It does not alter the fact that there is not a Palestinian state to recognize. At this point, there is no credible Palestinian partner for peace. This was not merely about Gaza, the US insisted, but about international legitimacy. To recognize a Palestinian state without negotiations, Washington argued, was to undermine Oslo, to weaken diplomacy, and to embolden Hamas. The representative ended with a pledge. America would keep working tirelessly to free hostages, to deliver humanitarian aid, and to seek a negotiated end to the war. Then it was China's turn. If the US message was about rejecting Hamas and warning against premature recognition, China's message was about structural injustice and urgency. The Chinese envoy began by thanking the nations that had convened the meeting and moved quickly to the heart of the issue. The Palestinian question is at the core of the Middle East issue, bearing on the Middle East's peace and stability and global peace and security. China argued that for more than 7 decades, the unresolved question of Palestine had shaped the region's instability. The Gaza conflict, the representative warned, had intensified volatility not only in Palestine and Israel, but across Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, and even Qatar. It was now a global issue. The envoy laid out 4 points. First, the tragedy in Gaza must end immediately. The Chinese representative condemned the scale of destruction, the civilian suffering, and Israel's ongoing military offensive. Military means are not the solution to the problem. An immediate ceasefire is the right way to save lives and bring hostages home. The call was blunt: stop the fighting now. Second, Beijing focused on the West Bank. Israel's expanding settlements, demolitions of Palestinian structures, and settler violence were highlighted as grave violations of international law. The E-1 settlement plan was singled out as particularly dangerous. China urged Israel to halt settlement activity, lift restrictions on Palestinian economic life, and respect international law. Third, the envoy emphasized historical injustice. Israel had long been recognized as a state, but Palestinians remained stateless. This, he said, was the root of the conflict. The two-state solution as the only viable way to solve the Palestinian question is irreplaceable and must not be denied. The world must push for recognition of Palestine, and the envoy welcomed recent steps by Western nations toward recognition. Finally, China called for peace and stability across the Middle East. Escalation, military adventurism, and regional flare-ups, the envoy warned, had put the entire region at a crossroads. The choice was stark: relaxation or escalation, dialogue or confrontation, peace or war. The Chinese envoy concluded by reaffirming Beijing's long-standing support for the Palestinian cause. China, he said, would continue to promote ceasefire, humanitarian relief, and the two-state solution, guided by President Xi Jinping's global security and governance initiatives. Then came Russia. The Russian Federation's statement echoed China's sense of alarm, but carried its own sharp edge. Moscow thanked the Secretary General for his briefing and noted the participation of regional states. But the message quickly turned pointed. The crisis in Gaza, whose scale in terms of civilian casualties has surpassed any conflict in recent decades, has led to escalation throughout the entire region. Russia emphasized the toll on civilians and criticized Israel's actions as unacceptable regardless of justification. The representative pointed out that solidarity among nations was growing, that many recognized the situation in Gaza could not continue. As the Russian envoy spoke, the chamber seemed to hold its breath. This was no longer just a debate over Gaza. It was about competing narratives of legitimacy, sovereignty, and justice. France warned of history's judgment. The US focused on terrorism and hostages. China emphasized structural injustice and urgency. Russia highlighted the scale of human loss. Taken together, these speeches told a story of paralysis. The Security Council, the very body meant to safeguard peace, stood divided. Each major power spoke passionately, but with fundamentally different visions for the path forward. The French voice appealed to history and responsibility. The US voice demanded accountability from Hamas and cautioned against premature recognition. China's voice called for an end to violence and the recognition of Palestine. Russia's voice underscored the human toll and questioned Israel's justifications. As the meeting wound down, the underlying truth was clear. While the chamber was filled with words, action remained elusive. The conflict in Gaza raged on. Civilians continued to suffer, and the international community, fractured by mistrust and competing interests, struggled to unite around even the most basic of steps: a ceasefire. The journalist's role in narrating this story is not only to relay the words spoken, but to place them in their broader context. This meeting was not an isolated event. It was part of a long struggle to balance national security, humanitarian obligations, historical grievances, and geopolitical rivalries. And it was a reminder that behind every speech, there are real lives at stake, families waiting for food, children waiting for safety, and nations waiting for peace. The Security Council chamber fell silent as the statements ended. Outside its walls, the bombs still fell, the hostages remained captive, and the suffering continued. The world waited for action. The speeches, powerful as they were, had yet to translate into peace.